think that any personal finance textbook would be complete without a thorough discussion of credit cards. And personally, I find credit cards to be quite useful. But there is a major downside of credit card use, and that is, what if you go into debt? What if you have credit card payments that you cannot pay back? Well, that could be really devastating. At the time of me writing this, creating this video, the average interest rate on new credit cards is about 23%, and that is compounded daily, which you will remember makes the debt that much worse, okay? So there's always a risk of teaching credit cards. And I've had a lot of people tell me that they don't think I should be teaching credit cards at all. I don't really agree with that logic, okay? The same reason I don't think abstinence education works in high school, I don't think failing to teach credit cards would be useful here. Most of my students already have credit cards. Just about everybody's going to get a credit card, so you should learn how to use one properly. And I think if you know how to use it properly and you are responsible and savvy, credit cards will help you. They will make your financial situation better, okay? But a lot of times the benefits of it are a little hard to find. And in this video, I'm going to explain to you why using a credit card can improve your financial situation. So first of all, let me explain the difference between credit cards and debit cards. So not everybody knows the difference. Now, debit cards allow you to simply withdraw money, usually from a checking account, to make purchases. So if you are using a debit card, you're really not borrowing. Now, there is a delay. When you use a debit card, it doesn't immediately pull the money out of your account. And it is possible to overdraft your account. But generally speaking, when you use debit card, you can think of it as pretty similar to just making a regular cash purchase. On the other hand, when you use a credit card, the spender is borrowing. There's no question about that. All right, when you use a credit card, that money's not coming directly out of your account. Rather, you are borrowing that money from a financial institution, and you're going to have to actively set up payments to repay that money that you borrowed. Okay, and that makes this a lot riskier from a borrowing standpoint because you can spend money you don't have. Hard to do that with a debit card, okay? So it is very, very risky. But if you do use a credit card, you can do it in a way that there will be no interest rate on those loans. What you'll find is if you have a credit card and you go into your account, you will see at least 3 figures. One of those figures is going to be your current balance. Another figure will be your last statement balance. And then finally, you'll see your minimum payment. And obviously I'm just making up the numbers here, but if you go to the book, freefinancebook.com, you will see my actual, I included a link to one of my accounts, or at least a picture, so you can see what this would look like in the real world. But maybe your current balance is $1,200, your last statement balance is $700, and your minimum payment is $40. This would be a pretty typical situation. When I got my first credit card, I spent money on it, and then I looked at this and I did not understand what it said, and I just paid off the entire thing. And that's not the worst thing to do. But what is actually optimal is to make your last statement balance. This is going to provide the most value to you, okay? So let me explain to you what's going to happen when you make these payments, okay? If you pay $0, so if you just don't make any payments at all, that's going to be the absolute worst scenario for most credit cards, okay? What they are going to do then is they're going to charge you a late fee. It's basically a penalty. And then immediately they're going to start charging interest. And they're going to charge interest on that $700 in last statement balance. Effectively, this $700 is what you are required to pay on the date of payment, on the required payment date, all right? And maybe this date is July 31st. If that's July 31st, what's that saying is you have to make a $700 payment, or we're going to start charging you interest, okay? So if you pay nothing, you're going to be charged a late fee in addition to being charged interest on the unpaid statement balance. If you pay $40, which a lot of people do, they pay the minimum. You're going to avoid the late fee at least, so that's good, but they're going to start charging interest. And specifically, they're going to start charging interest on the $660 in unpaid statement balance. And remember, we're talking like a 23% interest rate on that, right? So this can get out of hand very, very, very quickly. If you go a year with debt like this and you're just not making payments, you're just paying the minimum over and over again, that interest is going to compound so quickly that you can get yourself stuck behind the eight ball very early in life. So if you've heard of people that have a lot of credit card debt, all it really takes is mistakes when you're in your early 20s that you haven't rectified by the time you get in your late 20s. If that's you, then you're stuck in debt perhaps for the rest of your life. So it's really easy to make a mistake here. And frankly, that's what the credit card agencies are hoping you'll do. They're hoping you're going to make mistakes because they want to charge you interest. They don't really want you to pay it back in full, okay? In fact, if you always pay the last statement balance back, they're not necessarily making money on you. You may be somebody they're losing money on, okay? And that's because if you pay the $700 balance, there's going to be no interest and no late fees. That makes the remaining $500 here an interest-free loan, okay? Effectively, credit cards push back all spending about 1 month. So the last statement balance, that shows your spending during June. That's the spending you did from June 1st to June 30th, and then you have to pay it around July 31st. Now, I'm making up these numbers a little bit, but that's roughly how it operates, okay? When you make your payment on July 31st, you're repaying your purchases that you made a month ago, okay? And then the payments that are still remaining, the $500 extra here, the $500 that's above your last statement balance, that includes the payments that you've made in July. So you go out to eat July 8th and you spend $50, that $50 gets added to your current balance, but it's not included in your last statement balance because it will be rectified in the future. The purchase you make in June get paid off in July. The purchases you make in July get paid off in August, okay? So what the current balance shows is all of the money that you owe. The last statement balance shows how much you need to pay back soon, and the minimum payment shows how much you have to pay simply to avoid late fees, okay? So the optimal thing to do is to pay off your last statement balance, not your current balance, because that allows that $500 to continue to sit on your account interest-free, which means that the money you spent in the past, you get to delay repaying it. Now, how do you take advantage of this situation? Well, since you're not paying that $500 back, you could have that money sitting in bonds or a savings account or even in stocks, growing interest. So you can earn interest on the $500 you're not paying back, and then when you go to pay it back, remember, it's a 0% loan, okay? As long as you always pay off your last statement balance, there will be no fees and no interest. This is a great thing for you, okay? Let's explore that now. We're going to talk about something called the payment float. This is some weird stuff. This is not something you're going to see in many other textbooks. I don't know if you're going to see it in any other textbooks. But this idea of the payment float I deem to be absolutely essential. And I think the reason why a lot of books don't talk about this is because the writers don't know about it, or they're afraid to talk about something that's kind of complex, kind of abstract, okay? So to help us understand this point, let's imagine that somebody uses a debit card and they use it for a year. In January, they spend $4,000. In February, they spend $4,000, and this just goes on the whole year, right? They're just spending $4,000 every single month. This is terribly uninteresting, right? So far, we're not learning anything here. When you use a debit card, it's really quite simple. When you spend that money, the cost is felt by you almost instantaneously, right? When you make a payment on your debit card, you're paying that payment back, that cost back very quickly. So you might go to dinner on July 3rd, and then you find on your account you paid for that 2 days later. So it's virtually simultaneous. When you buy something is when you pay for it, okay? So that $4,000 that you spend feels like a $4,000 cost to you instantly. The same is true with cash. If you spend $50, the purchase and the cost, they're married. They happen at the exact same time. So all of your purchases just line up. And again, we're not learning anything here. This is not interesting. But let's compare this now to a credit card, and you will see why it's important to understand the difference. If you use a credit card now, and let's assume January, this is when you first get your very first credit card, okay? In January, when you spend $4,000, when do you feel that cost? So you get a brand new credit card right at the beginning of the year. You spend $4,000 on that card in January. When do you actually pay that money back? It's not until about the next month, maybe even a little further into the future, okay? But just to keep things easy, effectively what happens is the $4,000 you spend in January gets pushed back 1 month. So in February, you actually have your January payments due. So let's imagine it just like in this first scenario here, this person always spends $4,000 every month, just to make things nice and clean for us, okay? So they're always going to spend $4,000 every month. October, November, December, they're just living their lives, spending $4,000 every month, you know, not really changing their behavior. But since they're using a credit card, everything gets pushed forward, all right? February gets pushed forward to March. September here, we get pushed forward to October. Your September purchases get paid in October. Your October spending gets paid in November, right? Your November spending gets paid in December. And then finally, if we just assume that in December this person cancels the card or dies or something, that final December payment, we actually have to pay it the next year. Okay? But what's nice about using a credit card, if we go all the way back to the beginning, is in that very first month, you spent $4,000, but it cost you nothing. In that first month of having a credit card, you don't actually have any money to spend out of your credit or out of your checking account, because all of the spending you make in January will get pushed forward 1 month. Okay? So now let's compare. Compare using a debit card or cash to using a credit card. February through December are exactly the same, right? There's no difference here. February through December, everything looks exactly the same between those two. So we can just erase those and recognize that nothing interesting is happening there. But we have two differences. Namely, when you're using a credit card, you have a $0 expense in January. Whereas if you were using a debit card, you'd have to pay that money back right away. Also, when you use a credit card, you do have to repay $4,000 that came from December. So we've got a difference here, and we've got a difference here. How do we take advantage of that? All right? These two people are spending the same amount of money, right? This person's spending $4,000 a month, $48,000 a year. This person's spending $4,000 a month, $48,000 a year. But we have effectively pushed all payments back 1 month, and we can take advantage of this situation by investing our funds, okay? What this person can do that the first person can't is they can take the $4,000 that is freed up and invest it. They can create wealth. They can generate wealth through the credit card. So this is just 1 year. But they can still nonetheless take that $4,000 and invest it. Maybe if they go in stocks, they can expect a 10% return. It's risky, but that's the average return. If they do that for 1 year, they now have $4,400. Okay? So they now have $4,400 in money that they wouldn't otherwise have. Now, they're not going to get to keep all of that because in January of the next year, they got to pay back $4,000. Okay? All we're saying is they invest the money that they freed up by using a credit card instead of a debit card. That's the benefit of using a credit card. And then the cost of using that credit card is felt a year into the future when they have to repay that loan. And so effectively, this person can generate $400 by investing their money by using a credit card. Credit cards allow you to take money that you're not having to pay back now and invest them to generate extra profit for yourself. It's a complicated idea. It's kind of a strange idea, right? And in the real world, the math gets a lot messier here because you don't spend the same amount every month, right? And also, it's kind of hard sometimes to figure out when we should start and end these calculations, you know? When you cancel a credit card, you usually get another one. So there's really not like a clean cutoff like we have here. But to help us understand the value, let's do a longer run study. Let's say that you have a credit card for a much longer period of time. Specifically, let's imagine that you have a credit card for 50 years. Maybe you get your first credit card when you're 22 and you die when you're 72. And you have credit cards for that entire duration of your life. 50 years of using a credit card instead of cash, okay? What that means is if you always spend the same amount every single month, we can calculate the payment float pretty easily, okay? In the very first month, those purchases are pushed back. So when you are 22 years old, for example, that very first month, let's stick with $4,000. Let's assume you spend $4,000 every single month. In that first month, you spend $4,000, but the cost to you is $0, right? You're spending $4,000 on your card, but in that very first month, you have no cost because you're pushing everything back 1 month. So imagine you can just take all your purchases and just push them back 1 month for your entire life. Well, now we can take that $4,000 and invest it now for a very long period of time. We can take that $4,000 and invest it, hopefully get a 10% return. And we can do that for 50 years because that's how long you're going to be using a credit card. Okay? In doing so, that generates $469,563.41 in value. Again, where this money comes from, that very first month you get the credit card, you don't have any expenses. So you take that money that you didn't have to spend and you put it all into the stock market. That money gets to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. When you die, the very last month of payments is going to get pushed forward 1 month. So you do have to pay that off. So there's a $4,000 payment that we still have to pay, but that leaves us with a total value of about $465,000 from the payment flow. I said it's kind of complicated, right? And if this isn't making sense, or hell, even if it is, check out the book. freefinancebook.com, chapter 20. I can explain this in words a lot better than I can in a video. There you're going to find not only an example, but practice problems that allow you to work this out. Now, is this realistic? It's not fully realistic, okay? In reality, people don't spend the same amount every single month. One. Secondly, if you realized your net worth was going up, you probably would spend more money. So you wouldn't be able to realize the full extent of this value. But regardless of whether you totally buy what I'm showing you here, regardless of whether you believe all of the assumptions that we might put into an example like this, we have to recognize that using a credit card undoubtedly should mathematically help you. The payment float allows you to generate profits effectively out of thin air. Okay? And all that may seem complicated, but in reality, utilizing this in your life is quite easy. To take advantage of the payment floats, it's called a payment float because you're kind of floating your money into the future. Your costs are getting pushed forward, floating them forward a month at a time. All you need to do, first of all, is just use your credit card all the time. Anytime you're allowed to use your credit card and there's not any sort of additional fee attached to it, use your credit card, okay? That will allow you to put as many purchases 1 month into the future as possible. That's one. Two, always pay the last statement balance. Now, why do you want to pay the last statement balance? Well, if you pay at least the last statement balance, you avoid all interest. You definitely want to avoid all interest. So you want to pay at least that much. But you don't want to pay any extra because you want to push your purchases forward into the future as long as you're possibly allowed, right? You want to pay the minimum because if you pay the minimum, namely, in my eyes, this is the minimum, right? You want to pay at least the last statement balance so that the extra money that you could have paid, you don't pay. If you take that extra money that you could have paid and push it forward into the future, that gives you some time to invest the money that you have freed up, okay? So always pay the last statement balance. And then you might be wondering, how do I make sure all my money is invested? How do I take the money from my credit card and make sure it's invested? You don't have to categorize things. All you need to do is make sure that you invest as much as possible all the time. In other words, when I look at my investment account, I cannot point out the money that is used on credit cards. If I look at my investment account, I can't be like, oh, well, here's the $20,000 in my account because of my credit card payment float. I don't know where that money is. It all kind of gets lumped together. But the bottom line is, if I have $10,000 in credit card payments that I haven't made yet, and I'm investing all of my money all the time, I have effectively taken that $10,000 that I should have paid if I was using a debit card, and I have invested it, even if I can't point to where it is exactly, okay? If you do that, you're going to generate value. Okay, so I showed you the payment float. That was really complicated. Let me try to narrow that down and simplify it. It's really, at its core, a pretty simple idea. Credit cards allow you to get a 0% loan, which you can invest. So if you can invest money and earn more than 0% and borrow money at a 0% rate, you can profit from the difference. That's really all a payment float is showing you. The math that I displayed to you was to illustrate how large of a value you can generate from the payment float. But that's not the only benefit of using a credit card. There are many others. I'm going to focus on one primary benefit in addition to the payment float, and that is rewards. You probably know about rewards a little bit. And a lot of times in the personal finance community, there's an interesting relationship between credit card rewards and financial advice, okay? A lot of people out there basically says that you should avoid credit cards altogether. And that's because we know the potential devastation that it can create, okay? It can make lives a lot worse. To me, it's kind of like saying you should avoid alcohol. I can't go against that advice. I can't say that that's bad advice. If you tell everyone they should never use alcohol, I could see why you would do that. But I think it's also pretty easy to say that a lot of people benefit from alcohol. And hell, a lot of people are going to use alcohol whether or not you tell them not to, right? So if you're going to use a credit card, you want to take advantage of it fully. And there are definitely rewards that are generated from credit cards, which should help you, okay? The most simple type of rewards that are out there are cashback rewards. Most credit cards, and especially credit cards you want to target, will offer some sort of cashback benefit. Okay, a real simple one would be something like 1% cash back. So every time you spend $1, you save a penny. So you can make all of your purchases, or at least a lot of your purchases, 1% cheaper if you use a credit card instead of cash or a debit card. Okay? Some credit cards also have minimum spend bonuses, where there's something like, $300 in cash back if you spend $2,000 in the first 3 months of having a card. A lot of cards have little perks like this, okay? Now, is this going to help you or hurt you? Well, it depends, right? If this always helped the consumers, then the credit card agencies probably wouldn't provide them. But you might be able to guess why the credit cards offer, the agencies, the credit card companies, why they offer these types of incentives. Part of the reason is because they cause people to go into debt. Okay, people who have poor financial literacy will see a benefit like this and they will increase their spending on purpose just to try to realize the value of the minimum spend bonus. Or because they're getting 1% back, they might say, well, everything's a little bit cheaper, let me spend more money. If you do that, you're not going to fully take advantage of the card value, and it may really hurt your future. I'm guessing that's not you, though. I'm guessing you're financially literate, you're savvy, and you're responsible, which means you can take advantage of these programs. I mean, think about a 1% minimum spend bonus. Mathematically, that should help you, right? It has to, mathematically. As long as you keep buying the same stuff and everything's cheaper, you should come out ahead. Okay? Now, on the website, I go into great detail about this, and I actually have an entire page that discusses travel rewards. To be honest, I really take advantage of a lot of these minimum spend bonuses to get me free travel, but that is definitely not necessarily an important part of a financially salient process. Meaning you don't have to use a credit card, and you don't have to try to chase minimum spend bonuses to have a lucrative life. There are ways to do it without credit cards. This is just one little element, okay? But I know a lot of you are interested in this because I deal with students all the time and they care about minimum spend bonuses and other cashback rewards. So I encourage you to check out the website, specifically Chapter 20. Now, all of that being said is a major disclaimer. I would really be doing a bad job if I didn't point out the fact that loads of academic research shows that for various reasons, people spend more money when they use a credit card. And this is something that I cannot argue against, and I have no interest in arguing against. I think average consumers, when they get a credit card, are going to spend more money. The research is just too clear in showing that. Now, is that going to happen to you? Probably. You probably will spend more money if you have a credit card. And for that reason, you might decide just to not use one at all, and I cannot talk you against that. I cannot stop you from using cash. That's fine if you want to go that route. It's just what I've learned is most people are going to use a credit card regardless of what I tell them. So I would say if you're going to use a credit card, anyway, I'm not going to stop you from doing that. You're going to use a credit card, then I would advise you to try to find one that gives you 2% cash back instead of 1% cash back. That generates value. If you're willing to put in the legwork, I would encourage you to target credit cards that have a higher minimum spend bonus. But don't say I didn't warn you. All right? My biggest concern is somebody's going to watch this video and to go into credit card debt because they're trying to chase these rewards. No, this is not that important. It's just one of those little things that can make your financial life a little bit better if you are responsible and financially savvy. But if it turns out you spend a lot of money and you go into unexpected debt, then the cost of that is obviously much higher than the little 2% that you're getting back, okay? So you got to know yourself. If you're the type of person who has trouble with spending, you spend money that you don't have, you kind of, maybe even have an addiction to spending, then don't get a credit card. Stick with a debit card or cash. If you're the type of person that's very responsible, then you might consider diving into this and learning as much as you can because you can generate value from it, okay? So I'll stop there. Credit cards, an interesting topic, at least to me. If used properly, they help you. If used poorly, they really hurt you. So be smart.